Once again, thank you for being here. Today we will discuss two topics, effective relationships and spirituality. Relationships are very complicated today, because we are basically under the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle says, we cannot have the position of the particle and the velocity at the same time. And that is what is happening in relationships. We have a different position from momentum, that is, one person is in a position and the other is in momentum, they have a velocity. This is happening many times, especially in therapy reports. You meet a person and for a certain time it works because that person is still, they have a position, but the other, whether man or woman, it doesn't matter, has momentum, has velocity. So, one is still and the other is walking. There comes a time when, more or less, the frequencies match, the interests and everything else, and then what continues to grow starts to move away, moving away. So, position and momentum don't match, that's what makes relationships uncertain, the uncertainty principle. Will it last forever? That, until death do you part, thing has become very complicated, at least nowadays, because people's growth speeds vary a lot. It's very difficult for both people to grow at the same time and for there to be equal momentum for both, where both people would grow. This is very difficult because of the paradigm, if one of the two is in the old paradigm and the other in the new, there is already an absurd difference in frequency. That's why I have to assume that there is a certain understanding in order to talk about this level and above, otherwise in the next consultation I'll hear, "Ah, that was repetitive." But it has to be repetitive sometimes, so that the penny can drop. It's difficult to change the paradigm even 20, 30, 50 times later. It's very difficult, because it changes everything. So, people insist on staying with this world of appearance, materiality, solidity, mass, and refuse to understand that none of this is real, that all of this is a wave and that it should be treated as a wave. Everything is a wave, so there is no solution if it is not treated as a wave. Normally, there should be equal growth between men and women if the paradigm were the same, if men's right hemisphere was functioning perfectly, if there were no emotional blocks such as putting up a shield and not allowing oneself to have any emotions. You see, there are many ifs for things to work. We have this somewhat difficult situation of having to make relationships work. When people come to talk to me, they expect magic, that everything will work out, that everything will be fine, that they will be happy forever, and that is difficult. Why? Because resonance transfers information, frequency. This frequency enters, takes hold of the person and exponentiates it even more, adding knowledge after knowledge, courses, skills, vocations, archetypes, etc. Everything is information, everything that exists, has existed and will exist in any dimension, in any universe, is pure information. Since information never disappears, not even information that falls into a black hole disappears, let alone an MBA course, the PIS manual from Caixa Econômica Federal, and so on. Any information exists for the rest of eternity. And all of this is quantum mechanics. All of this is not metaphysics, it is not esotericism, it is not magic, it is pure physics. The thing is, there are boundaries that people are reluctant to cross because the consequences are enormous. So, everything that will shake up the status quo is fiercely resisted, both at an institutional and personal level. If it weren't like that, people who do the resonance in a month would have made a giant leap. Today, here, I had a testimony, they came to talk to me and the person obtained a spectacular result. The person is not here, but this person's mother had a result in 3 days. Is there something special about this person? No, she is absolutely the same as all of us, only this person is not resisting due to traumas, blocks, taboos, prejudices, comfort zone, self-sabotage and paradigm. Imagine this in relationships, where you need to open your mind to be able to get results. Quantum mechanics is a result, otherwise it is no use, it is not interesting. Science that does not produce results would not matter. What's the point of talking about quantum mechanics if there was no light here, pointing to the lamps, if your cell phone, internet, subway ticket, free toll pass, satellite, atomic bomb and everything else didn't work? All this electronic paraphernalia is quantum mechanics, so we want results. Results are the simplest thing to obtain in the universe, because the universe is under, or is made of, or is of, laws. So, everything has laws, rules, it is an implicit order in the universe. We have economic, psychological, social, physical, chemical laws and so on, all areas, all sciences, everything has its little rules that are inherent to the system in which it is organized. System within system, each level has its rules, its laws, and relationships could not escape this. What is a feeling or an emotion? It is pure biochemistry. Everything you feel, everything you think, everything you do, is a product, a result, your behavior, is a result of biochemistry, neurotransmitters. You have dopamine, serotonin, endorphins and much more. Putting this together is a cake recipe, X% dopamine, X% serotonin, X% endorphins and so on, it forms a recipe that results in chocolate cake, if the formula is correct. And, like any cake, it needs 20, 30, or 40 minutes in the oven to be good. If you put all the batter in there, the milk, the yeast, and put it in the oven for 10 minutes, there is no cake. For 5 minutes, there is no cake. Now, if you use the recipe correctly, 40 minutes at X temperature, there is cake. Relationships are the same thing. For all of us, biological beings, biological computers, which is what we are. We process information at a biological level too, we constantly produce chemical substances that neurons use to communicate with each other, neurotransmitters and hormones. This formula, which is created all the time, generates neuroassociations, that is, you associate someone, a product, a brand with an emotional state X. In addition, we have archetypes, a complicated word, an even more complicated concept, but which is the foundation of the universe. Everything that exists in the universe is formed by archetypes. Archetype is the primordial idea, as Plato said. The entire universe is pure consciousness. In order for something to have existed, someone had to think, everything was thought. It is impossible for something to emerge from nothing does not exist. So, when we say that a vacuum is nothing, it is not the absence of something, quantum vacuum is everything, it is the plenum, full of potential. Therefore, in order to have a feeling, you need a chemical formula and time, without this, there is no basis for anything. That is why the vast majority of relationships do not work out, because there is still no chemistry being built to have a basis, some basis, at least for some time, momentum, and some possibility. You see, this is serious business, it is complicated, and chemistry needs to be built. So, when you look at someone and say, there is chemistry, it is clear that there is chemistry because just this unconscious interaction, of capturing the other person's vibe, already causes a symbiosis that makes you feel whether or not there is a chance, whether it is pleasant, whether there is sympathy and everything else. This is already a good sign, but it is only the beginning. In a matter of 15 seconds, you can already know, if you look at a person, whether they are viable or not. So, is it very difficult to select someone when there are 3.5 billion people on the opposite side, half the population? It's not difficult. It's not, because you have contact with a few people and in 15 seconds you are able to evaluate whether they are interesting or not. There is no chemistry yet. Then you have a 15-minute conversation and that should be enough to know whether they are useful or not, whether they have a future, whether they are viable or not. In 15 minutes. You will already do this with the minimum number of people, because the vast majority of the base of the pyramid, you already exclude in 15 seconds. Those who you think are viable, you will spend 15 minutes. Well, it will still take some time for the chemistry to form, for the chocolate cake to form, it will take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 18, 36 months, 5 years, 10 years. Sometimes, they spend 30 years of marriage and then they separate, because 30 years were not enough to create chemistry, because everything was done wrong. In order for chemistry to form, the neuroassociation between two people, she, pointing to the spectator, needs to see me and her brain must produce dopamine, serotonin, endorphin, norepinephrine, etc., and mine too, vice versa. It is bidirectional. It is not like this: she looks at me and produces dopamine and I look at another person and produce dopamine with that other person, while the first person is producing dopamine with me, which is what happens with most people, isn't it? Isn't that how it happens? One likes the other, who likes the other, who likes the other, and then there are never two who like each other. This is the hardest thing there is, because there is no time to generate all this substance, because it takes time. Remember? It is a chemical formula and every chemical formula needs time. When you put it in the test tube, it takes time for an atomic, molecular reaction to occur, for the molecules to come together and form a third thing. This time cannot be measured in minutes, in half an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, the time of a party. It is literally impossible. What happens? In this tiny amount of time, only sexual attraction happens. End. That's it. There is no chemistry whatsoever, so something based solely on that lasts for a very short time. If we want something more solid, that has some probability, remember? Position and momentum. We need months and months and months to generate chemistry. And normally, one of them is still and the other is in great motion because one of the two has taken control of generating this chemistry. It is very difficult for both people to do this, because practically no one knows about it. I only talked about all this in the relationship workshop. This is the first time I will be speaking in a lecture open to all genders, which is still being recorded. This subject is very difficult to understand, because of the paradigm and because, of course, people are very reluctant to apply a methodology, no matter how scientific it may be, because it requires time and effort. And human beings hate everything that requires effort. Comfort zone. Remember at the beginning of the lecture, I said, comfort zone. It takes a lot of work to do that. So, there is no relationship, it stays the way it is, and that's fine. But, if you want something that has some viability, to generate this dopamine, serotonin, endorphin and everything else, you need to talk about certain subjects using certain archetypes. Each archetype causes the production of a certain neurotransmitter, unidirectional, archetype X causes neuro Y, Z causes B, and so on. You need to create a neuroassociation in the other person, both dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and so on. So, you need to find the right point for each of these substances, because each neurotransmitter causes a stimulus. Dopamine causes strength and courage, serotonin and endorphins are joy and happiness. That's why you can't just talk about archetypes that generate serotonin because then you'll both laugh a lot and nothing will happen. Everyone will be happy, everyone will laugh a lot and it's the same thing as watching a comedy on TV. You can watch Woody Allen, you'll have a lot of fun, everything can work out as it is, but it won't generate anything, because you need oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin is what creates an emotional bond between two people. Without this hormone, forget it, there's no bond. So, to keep the person in your field of attraction, you need oxytocin and that takes time. During these conversations, which start at 15 minutes, let's assume that 15 minutes have passed, you can arrange something, like a coffee shop, a shopping mall, anything that you can talk about, CONVS. In the brain there are two neural pathways for emotional relationships, one pathway goes here and the other goes there, opposite sides. If you take the left pathway, you won't get the cake recipe, if you take the right pathway, it's just a metaphor, you'll get the cake recipe, that is, you'll create the neurons and create this connection. Guess what? What attitude do you take, so that the left pathway, for example, doesn't generate anything? Remember? It takes time. The left pathway is very short, if there is immediate physical activity, the brain goes off on a tangent and that's it, it will stay only in this phase, let's say, sexual and will not go to the other side. Every time you meet the person, your brain branches out along this path. And does not generate the production of neurotransmitters to make the cake a feeling. As a result, this activity cannot occur ahead of time. The brain must be allowed to produce it slowly and gradually, as stimuli are given, stimulus response, bidirectional stimulus response. It is a game of chess. After a certain amount of time, you can start to measure whether the result is correct, because you notice the reactions, all the ways the person behaves, gestures, looks, everything, all the expressions. You notice whether there is correspondence or not. This correspondence is the production of neurotransmitters, and this means that the feeling is practically inevitable if it is done correctly, scientifically. It is the protocol of procedures. If it is done correctly, there is a feeling. If it is not done correctly, there is no feeling. It is the most banal thing that exists, of course, after it is understood, because until it is understood, it is a black box. This whole drama of humanity remains until it is understood. I was going to talk about it today, but until this is understood by the masses, all over the planet, relationships will be this whole drama, which, by the way, there are a lot of people who like drama, and those who like drama will not apply any of what I am saying, but for those who want results, there is certainly only this path. This was the result of many studies, both in the areas of psychology, biochemistry, genetics, and everything else. There is no margin for error in this. In the same way that we build, we deconstruct. It is very simple to know if this formula works, but, as always, human beings really like destruction, and when we say, build, visualize, imagine that the car will appear in the garage, be patient, let go. No, that is too difficult, he stays there looking to see if the car arrived in the garage. Relationships are the same situation, you need to give it time for the formula to take hold. Now, to deconstruct it is the same thing, it is as easy or even easier. If the feeling is X% of dopamine, serotonin, endorphin, etc., and each neurotransmitter produces one of these things, what happens if you break the formula? If instead of 18% of dopamine you have 15%, instead of 30% of serotonin you have 20%. You broke it, there is no more chocolate cake, the feeling changes. In the beginning, it is a thing of great friendship that grows. This is not a quantum leap, it is linear because the drops of dopamine and serotonin are dripping and the feeling goes slowly and gradually. Let's suppose with a 10% slope, it goes, growing continuously, for a month, 2, 6, 10, however long it is. This happens a lot in offices, every single day, and people do not know how it happened. Then it turns into all that drama. But how are you going to manage this, right? Because in an office you are next to someone for 8, 10, 12 hours a day talking about billing, inventory, any subject. Any subject will do. That's where the danger lies. Why? Because any subject will do. Remember? Momentum is speed. You go for a day, a month, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, we said 10 years and everyone laughed, but how long do you stay at a company? There are people who stay at a company for 30 years, and when they are 35 they retire and continue. So, imagine that there are 2 people in a company, in the same room, who have been there for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years talking about billing all the time. After 30 years of living together, a couple is going to separate and the son suggests to the father, why don't you tell her that you love her? The father says it and ends the separation. Why? This word, which is an archetype, generates oxytocin, and that's it. Resolved. There was something missing, the formula was breaking, and he started to build it again. So, when you deconstruct, which is what was happening in this couple's house, remember what we said? You slapped the plant, you just have to stop putting in the archetypes that create dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, which will break down the formula, the chocolate will turn into a paste in the oven. So, it is very simple to both create and uncreate. The possibilities for conversation are endless. Before someone asks, what is the manual? What is the list of things we have to say to create this? I can give you some examples, but it varies according to the situation, the moment, the environment, the possibilities, the mutual evaluation. This is a game of chess. It is not a game of patience, which you play alone with the deck of cards. It's a game of chess, because you give a stimulus, the other person has a response, immediately, he can give a stimulus and you give a response. It's more or less, let's say like in the Wild West, a duel of who shoots first. Why is this subject necessary to be understood and learned? Because since there is no defense against the production of neurotransmitters given the correct stimulus, if I say a key word to a certain person, they produce dopamine anyway. The person has no way of avoiding this, no way. It's stimulus response, and what will produce this is their subconscious, so before they can think they heard the word, it has already been produced, it's already in their bloodstream and they are already feeling it. Imagine that this is an art, in addition to being a science. It is an art because the infinite possibilities of applying it are what generate the state of the art. It means that if you pass someone in the mall and lay eyes on them in 15 seconds, you already know if it's you or not. In fact, in 3 seconds there is already a pre-evaluation in the unconscious. When you lock eyes, 3 seconds is enough, however, for the neocortex to process everything, it is much slower, it will need 15 seconds. But, let's suppose that in the 15 seconds in which it locked eyes on you, it has already decided that you are the target at that moment. Remember that in this world, on planet Earth, there are all kinds of people, from rabbits, zebras, cheetahs, tigers, lionesses, turtles, dogs, there is everything. Therefore, in Serengeti, if the zebra is not smart, it becomes easy lunch. That is why we have to understand this subject, otherwise it will happen once, twice, 3 times, 18 times, 150 times, it is a lot of disappointment. Each one of these is a difficult business to manage if the person does not know harmonic resonance. Because with resonance, you go and do this, snap your fingers, and break the formula. You set a wave, the wave enters and you are feeling it, you have a chemical formula in relation to the person, you need to undo this dopamine, serotonin, quickly, because otherwise you will be waiting for it to come back for 20, 30 years, as I have many testimonies. Is it possible to undo this in a month and not feel anything anymore? Yes, it does. I have many cases like this. You just have to decide that you don't want it anymore, you can reset it. The frequency entered, the formula was broken, remember? The frequency will make you produce dopamine, serotonin, endorphins and everything else, according to the information that enters your brain. It changes the software and you produce according to the software that is current. So, depending on the information that enters, it breaks the formula, reset it. But how many people have access to this information? 100, 200, 500, 700 people. How many people know that harmonic resonance exists, that this work exists, that it is possible to do it like this, snap your fingers, and solve the various issues? Because the people who know about this, for example, are in a very privileged position in this matter too. In addition to all the areas that you can benefit from, can you also run the risk of making mistakes, of trying to do it? You can. If you start a conversation with someone, let's assume that the other person is faster than you and shoots faster. If they set the commands, said the key words, told the right stories and generated dopamine in you faster than you can generate in them, if you don't know about the subject, guess what? Your chance of generating something in the other person is practically zero. Because you don't know what to say, right? You sit down to have a coffee in a mall, have a snack, and talk about what? If you don't know what to say, you talk about a bunch of generalities that don't mean anything, they are very weak archetypes. So, that idle chat will literally lead to nothing more. But the other person knows what they are doing, they are saying exactly what they want to get as a result in your brain. This is in a banal conversation about soccer, chemistry, the oil spill in Mexico, the World Cup, women's clothing, cosmetics, tarot, magic, hairdressing, anything goes, cinema, theater, literature, film, actor. There are infinite possibilities for placing the stimulus, so there is no rule that you can have in your pocket to consult. He said this, now I'm going to look up what I'll say. You can't call Hélio in real time either, he said this, now what do I say? This happens. I receive emails with huge reports, the person records the MSN conversation and passes it on to me to analyze and see what is going wrong. They ask why he is acting like this or that. I'm trying to give him a command and he doesn't react or he's doing everything wrong. I dissect the email, respond, and show all the stupid things the person is usually doing, because it's obvious that if the person is giving him a stimulus and he doesn't get a response, he's doing it wrong. Okay, I give him guidance, I tell him to do like this, like that, and guess what? Then he gets the next email and tells me what he did, and everything is the opposite of what I said. If I continued, there would be no room, because when in doubt during the conversation, if you're talking and there comes a moment when you feel, intuition is a little red light that flashes all the time, you feel that, I don't know, what should you say? Because you feel it, okay. You have to feel it. You have to do a self-analysis all the time, like an open window processing an operating system all the time, to know what you're feeling. So, when someone starts talking to you, in 15 minutes, half an hour or an hour, the person is able to tell you a story, a stimulus that you won't be able to undo even 20 years from now if you don't understand the subject. There is a case where a doctor did a test like this. He had a patient, he told her a story and she left, her medical problem resolved and she went on with her life. After 15 years, they met again in a restaurant, said hello, and he was able to do the test he wanted. He said a keyword X and she behaved exactly the way he had programmed her to do. It's been 15 years since he saw the other person. 15 years. It's a real case. So, there's no time limit, no age limit, no limit at all, for this. Once the command is given ad infinitum, there's nothing to stop it, it stays there, in a subprocessor the whole time. As soon as you hear the key word, you have certain attitudes. This is very useful when you want to use the human mind for the negative side of the force. Imagine the possibilities of this, infinite possibilities as they say in quantum mechanics.